Up until now, we've spoken about sensing energy, directing it, and understanding the body as a living current. And that's all internal, or at least it begins that way. But the moment you start interacting with spirits, whether you call them ancestors, daemons, guides, intelligences, or simply forces, you're in a relationship. And relationships, if they're going to be real and sustainable, are built on exchange. Offerings are one of the oldest and most misunderstood aspects of magic. People tend to swing to extremes. Either they dismiss offerings as superstition, like primitive gestures left behind by less enlightened cultures, or they turn them into rigid rituals full of anxiety about getting every detail right. Neither approach actually grasps what's going on. But before we dive deeper into that, I want to quickly thank Rev Kai for supporting this channel and today's video, which is sponsored by them. Rev Kai is a specialized astrologer and diviner with over 25 years of experience. They provide a strategic blueprint for your life using little known medieval and Renaissance astrological methods gleaned from recently discovered manuscripts. If you want to stay ahead of the curve, RevKai offers regular forecasting for the month or year ahead, so you always know exactly what's coming. They even specialize in deep dive services like identifying your innate magical skills and uncovering the name of your natal genius. For major events like business launches, weddings, they use electional astrology to find your window for success. And if you've never known your birth time, RevKai's rectification service can find it for you, giving you an accurate map to work with. They also help people build sustainable connections through ancestor veneration and spirit communication, which is quite apt for today's video. Sorting through lineage and tradition with confidence. Now, RevKai is offering a special 20% off for my viewers. So visit revkai.com and use the secret password Midnight Hair when you book your initial consultation. So stop guessing and start navigating with precision. And now, back to the living current. Right. So an offering is not about pleasing a spirit in the way you might appease a temperamental god. It's about creating a point of contact, a shared current where something of yours meets something of theirs. You are feeding a connection. That distinction is important because it changes how you approach the entire act. You're not begging for attention or bribing, you're participating. If you strip away the symbolism for a moment, what you're really doing is transferring energy in a form that has meaning, both to you and to whatever you're engaging with. The physical object, whether it's a candle, glass of water, incense, alcohol, food, or even something abstract like breath or attention, is just the carrier. The real offering is the charge behind it. So think about the difference between absent-mindedly lighting a candle and doing it with full awareness, with intention, with that subtle shift where your body, breath, and focus align. The object is the same, the effect is not. So spirits, broadly speaking, don't need your food or your wine in any literal sense. They're not sitting somewhere eating your offerings like a meal. What they engage with is the subtle layer, the energetic imprint, the intention, the life you place into that act. You're offering them access to your current, shaped in a particular way. And that's where things become more interesting. Because the moment you understand offerings as energetic exchange, you realize they're not one directional. You're not just giving, you're opening a channel where something can also flow back. And this is why consistent offerings tend to deepen contact over time. It's not because the spirit is being kept happy. It's because you're building a stable pathway. You're training your body, your mind, and your environment to enter a specific state where interaction becomes easier, clearer, and more tangible. It's like tuning a frequency. And the more often you do it, the more stable the signal becomes. Now, here's where people often get stuck. What should you actually offer? There are traditional answers to this. Different systems will tell you that certain spirits prefer certain things, specific herbs, foods, colors, scents, or substances. And yes, those correspondences can be useful. They give you a starting point, a language that has been refined over time. Uh, but if you treat them as fixed rules, you miss the deeper layer. Offerings work best when there's resonance, not just symbolic correctness, but actual connection. If you're offering something you don't care about, something that means nothing to you, the charge behind it is weak. It's hollow. On the other hand, when you offer something that carries personal significance, something that costs you a little, not necessarily financially, but energetically, the effect is very different. There's weight to it. That's why simple offerings often work better than elaborate ones. A glass of water given with full presence can be more effective than an expensive bottle of wine poured out without thought. Water, in particular, is worth paying attention to. It's often overlooked because it seems too basic, but it's one of the most responsive mediums you can use. It holds charge easily. It's neutral enough to be shaped by intention, and it reflects the state you're in when you offer it. There's a reason it appears in so many traditions across the world. Incense works in a different way. It transforms as it's offered. Solid becomes smoke, visible becomes invisible. It creates a movement, diffusion, a sense of something crossing between states. When you use it consciously, it's not just a pleasant scent, it's a signal, a bridge. Fire through candles adds another layer. It's active, dynamic, consuming. When you light a candle as an offering, it's not just placing something static on an altar. You're initiating a process. The flame becomes a focal point, a place where attention gathers and energy condenses. Food and drink carry a more grounded quality. They're tied to life, to survival, to the body. Offering them can create a stronger sense of presence, especially in work involving ancestors or earthbound spirits. But again, it's not about quantity or extravagance, it's about the quality of the act. There's also a category of offerings that people don't talk about as often, but which can be incredibly powerful. Offerings of action. Some will call this an offering, others may prefer to call it a devotional act. But this is where things move beyond objects and into behavior. You might dedicate a piece of work, a creative act, a habit, or even a specific effort to a spirit or current. You're not placing something on an altar, you're shaping your life in a way that becomes the offering. This is more demanding, but it's also more transformative because now the exchange isn't limited to a moment, it extends into your daily existence. For example, you might decide that every time you write, you're feeding a particular current, or that maintaining a certain discipline, whether it's physical, mental, or magical, is part of the offering. Over time, this builds a very different kind of relationship. It's not occasional contact, it's integration. Of course, with that comes a need for clarity. Not every spirit or force you encounter needs to be fed, and not every interaction requires an offering. This is where discernment comes in, and it's something you develop through experience, not through theory. If you approach every contact with the assumption that you must give something, you can end up weakening your position. You're effectively training yourself to operate from obligation rather than choice. Exchange should be intentional, not automatic. At the same time, if you never offer anything, you limit the depth of what's possible. You're keeping the interaction shallow. It's transactional in the worst sense, asking without investing. The balance sits somewhere in the middle. You give when it makes sense. When you want to deepen a connection, stabilize a working, or acknowledge the presence of something that has shown up in a meaningful way. You you don't give out of fear, and you don't give out of habit. There's also a question of timing. Some people prefer to give offerings before a working, in a way of, or as a way of opening the space and establishing contact. Others prefer to give after, as a form of thanks or closure. Both approaches can work, and often you'll find yourself doing a combination of the two. I would advise against the approach whereby you are only giving the offering as payment for the task the Spirit has done for you, and usually only after the task is complete. This is kind of like the vending machine approach. It's really not a good one. So try and avoid that. What matters more than the timing is the state you're in when you do it. If you're distracted, rushed, or treating it like a chore, the effect will reflect that. If you're present, aware, and engaged, even a brief offering can carry significant weight. This brings us to something that doesn't get said often enough. Offerings change you. Every time you make one consciously, you're reinforcing a pattern. You're training your attention, your body, and your subtle senses to enter a particular mode of interaction. Over time, this builds sensitivity. You start to notice shifts more easily. You begin to feel when something is received, when the atmosphere changes, when there's a response. It's subtle at first, easy to dismiss, but if you stick with it, it becomes more distinct. And with that comes responsibility. Because once you start that exchange, it's harder to pretend that nothing is happening. You're no longer just going through motions. You're participating in a relationship that has effects on you, on your environment, and potentially on others. This is where ethics enters the picture, not as a set of imposed rules, but as a natural consequence of awareness. If you're feeding a current, what are you feeding it with? What kind of energy are you putting into that exchange? Are you reinforcing something that aligns with your direction, or something that pulls you off course? These are not abstract questions. They become very real over time. There's also the question of closure, which is often overlooked. Once an offering has been made, what do you do with it? Different traditions have different answers for this. Some will tell you to leave offerings out for a specific period, then dispose of them in a particular way, burying them, burning them, pouring them out. Others are less prescriptive. The key point is this: don't treat offerings as ordinary objects once they've been used. They've been part of a process. They've carried charge. Even if that charge is subtle, it's there. So develop a consistent way of handling them. It doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be intentional. Pouring a libation onto the ground, for example, can be a simple and effective way of returning the offering. It completes the cycle. It acknowledges that something has been given and released. Leaving food to decompose naturally outside in a garden, for instance, where appropriate, can serve a similar function. It returns the substance to the environment rather than keeping it in your space. What you want to avoid is absent-minded disposal, throwing things away without any sense of closure. It breaks the pattern you've just created. As you continue working with offerings, you'll start to develop your own preferences, your own sense of what works and what doesn't. This is where personal gnosis begins to take shape, not as random intuition, but as experience built over time. You'll notice that certain offerings seem to take hold more effectively, that certain combinations of timing, substance, and state create stronger responses. You'll also notice that, or when something feels flat, when the connection isn't there. So pay attention to that. This is your feedback loop, not in a vague, abstract sense, but in a very practical way. You try something, you observe the effect, you adjust. Over time, this refines your practice into something that actually works for you rather than something you're copying from a book. And that's where this all leads. Offerings are not about following rules handed down without question. They're tools, simple on the surface, but capable of opening deeper layers of interaction when used with awareness. They teach you about exchange, about attention, about the reality of relationship in magic. They also teach you something about value, because every offering, no matter how small, carries a choice. You're deciding to give something, your time, your focus, your energy, in a directed way. And in doing that, you're shaping not just the interaction with whatever you're engaging, but your own current as well. You're defining what you consider worth feeding. So the next time you make an offering, don't overcomplicate it. Don't worry about getting everything perfect. Just be present. Feel the act as you do it. Notice the shift in your body, your breath, your awareness. Let the object become secondary and the exchange take center stage, because that's where the real work is happening. Not in the candle or the incense or the glass of water, but in the current that moves between you and whatever is listening.